You're good to go. But you are muted.
Okay, thank you for telling me. Everyone can hear me?
Yep.
All right. So my name is Chris, and my project was the impact of COVID-19 on healthcare workers around the world. So basically what I did was I found studies of countries and their healthcare workers and how they dealt with COVID. So I focused on 4 countries. I did Italy, China, Pakistan, and the US. So the origin of COVID-19, I'm sure you all are somewhat familiar with that, but it emerged in December of 2019 in Wuhan, China. And on December 31st, the WHO, World Health Organization, was notified of an unknown respiratory illness. So on January 7th, China officially identifies it as a novel coronavirus. So on January 13th, Thailand records the first case outside of China. And then on the 15th and 20th, Japan and the US record their first cases. And then around late February, I think the 23rd of February, Italy was actually the first country to do a nationwide lockdown. And then finally on March 11th, 2020, COVID-19 was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization, or WHO. So COVID-19's impact in Italy. So one of the reasons I picked Italy was because it was one of the first hotspots. And the study was done with 145 healthcare workers. It was 72 doctors and 73 nurses. And this is important to note, but it was done during the outbreak stage. So there are different stages that we'll see as I go along, but the outbreak stage specifically is widespread human infection. And for this study, the participants had to give socio-demographics and clinical information. And they also did 4 different standardized tests to measure anxiety, depression, PTSD, and quality of life. And one example of the 4 tests would be the state trait anxiety inventory form. So this specific test is used to help discern anxiety symptoms from depression symptoms. So that was just one of the tests. So Italy's outbreak, you can see on the map here from February 25th all the way to you can see Italy's predicament. It was a pretty fast outbreak. So in this study, they found that healthcare workers reported higher levels of post-traumatic stress and depressive symptoms. Also, both men and women reported higher levels of stress. And then more specifically, single women reported higher levels of depressive symptoms, and older women reported higher levels of post-traumatic stress. Also, this study also falls in line with the general population. And also at the conclusion of the study, they found that a more longitudinal study is needed to fully grasp the effects of COVID. So next is COVID-19. I was going backwards. All right, there we go. COVID-19's impact in China. So the study took place during the post-pandemic stage, which means the disease activity is at seasonal levels. You could roughly compare it to flu seasons, even they're not exactly the same, but the study included 3,477 participants from 22 hospitals across Beijing. And in addition, the Chinese government actually participated in this study, a cross-sectional study, in order to examine the effects of the pandemic. So this actually focused on a couple of things. So there are job demands and job resources. So job demands actually describe the physical and psychological effort needed to repeat the same tasks over and over again. So in the case of a pandemic, those tasks would be epidemic investigation, virus testing, and self-protection measurements. So in order to help mitigate some of those job demands, there's job resources. So job resources take the form of social and organizational support. So social support would be support among the employees in the workplace, whereas organizational support would be support from the hospital or an organization associated with the hospital. So it's like from higher up. So as you can see from this graph, social support was actually found to be more effective. And you can see on the graph to the left, this line right here, lacking social support actually yielded higher stress compared to lacking organizational support. So I also believe that social support is a little bit more tangible rather than support coming from higher above. The lines below also show this. You can see there's high social support. The stress is way lower compared to high organizational support. So this next slide will be COVID-19's impact in Pakistan. So Pakistan is considered a developing country. And this study was also done during the post-pandemic stage, which is disease activity at seasonal levels. So at the time of the study, June 20th, 2020, Pakistan had about 265,000 cases and just under 6,000 deaths. So I think Pakistan is important to note because it has a large population of about 200 million people. So while healthcare workers are used to some traumatic situations, with the COVID pandemic, these situations were far more severe and persistent. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to take the time and research this country. The study itself focused on the association between COVID-19 and mental well-being. So the fear of COVID-19 in Pakistan. So the study took nurses from 12 public health sectors and used something called predictive analysis. So this allows researchers to make associations through the data that the nurses provide. So it would be such as the fear of COVID-19 and its relation to psychological well-being. So some of the results that they found was significant associations were found between fear of COVID-19 and distress. Also, exposure to COVID-19 also led to high levels of anxiety and psychological distress. Also, the lack of social support, which I found to be concerning, given the importance of it that was found in the previous study that was done in China. So that was a little concerning, especially the country was also struggling with protective equipment and virus testing. In a country with 225 million people, that can be kind of a scary situation. So COVID-19's impact in the United States. So COVID obviously impacted the US in similar ways. However, I wanted to use this time to kind of underline the power of the states, which is why I put this graphic with the states' flags to kind of show that even though we're one country, each state has its own laws and stuff. So one example would be the vaccine rollout. So the federal government was responsible for payment, ordering, and obtaining the vaccines, and the states were responsible for distributing it and the administration of the vaccines. So this means the vaccines were just left to the states with no overarching national strategy. So this resulted in 50 different plans and 50 different systems. And in addition to that, the health departments were not financed. So, and they were not experienced or trained to actually implement all of these vaccine plans. So with the states having different systems in place, I decided to focus on a study in Pennsylvania, as well as some evidence from New Hampshire from my mother, who is a nurse as well. So the study in Pennsylvania took place around July and August of 2020. And it was also in the post-pandemic stage and involved 6 hospitals, 20 different residencies, and altogether 257 participants. For this study, they used the Mayo Wellbeing Index. So this is used to determine the quality of life, fatigue, and suicidal ideation. So this was done on a scale of 1 to 7. So if you scored higher than 5, then it would indicate poor well-being. So the study found that 16% of healthcare workers scored higher than 5, which is a little bit lower than the national average of, I think it was 19%. And then one thing I found that was interesting about this study was that males had actually reported higher levels of stress compared to females, which contrasts with some of the other studies that I've been looking at, which I thought that was kind of interesting. So some anecdotal evidence that I got from my mom. She has been a nurse for over 35 years. And in her recounting of the outbreak, it kind of falls in line with what I found in the other studies. So before COVID hit her, and I think this was around December, January, but they noticed, her and the staff noticed an uptick in flu symptoms. So when they tested these patients, they tested negative, which kind of perplexed a lot of people because it was like very similar to the flu. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So when March came and COVID actually like hit and the country had to shut down, where she worked before was urgent care. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that whole thing was transformed into a respiratory clinic. And there was plastic everywhere, walls were put up, they had hazmat suits. It was pretty crazy. And then, yeah, so those were some of her recounting. And then I do have some thoughts that didn't pop up in my presentation. I did come across some papers on how the relationships between nurses and hospitals, especially during the pandemic, has become more and more strained, with nurses asking for higher pay. While I was researching that, I found that travel nurses actually get paid significantly more than nurses who stay in hospitals. But after digging a little deeper, I found that travel nurses don't typically get benefits, but nurses who stay in hospitals do get benefits. So that kind of made up for the pay difference, I thought. I'm not sure about that. And then another thing that I thought was interesting was the media praise of nurses and doctors, like frontline workers and hero or whatever, was all just like a ploy to keep nurses from demanding a higher pay. So I'm not sure if that has any truth to it, but it was something that popped up a few times, so I thought it was worth mentioning. I think just overall, the pandemic kind of shone a light on a healthcare system that's in need of a little bit of reform. And also the RNA and the vaccines, which helped for such a fast rollout. So yeah, I think those are some like little bright lights that we can find through the pandemic. Yeah, that's it.
Chris, so you studied 4 different countries.
Yeah.
I didn't hear much in your presentation where you're drawing, you're actively contrasting one with another. You did China and Italy, and so, but so what are your conclusions if you're talking about all putting the data from all 4 countries into one bucket and then comparing what you've got?
Well, the countries that I picked, they all kind of had differing situations. So, for example, Italy was hit hard and quickly. So I kind of wanted to research that. And then China, obviously, because that's where it originated. And as far as comparing the 4 countries, I think they're all kind of pretty different, given that Pakistan's also a developing country.
So I'm not familiar with the health system in Pakistan, but in China and Italy, they both have the government runs the health system, in contrast to what happens here. So did you notice any difference? Could you draw any conclusions from that, in that, you mentioned actually that in the US, all 50 states tend to be different from each other. Do you see any advantage in extreme circumstances, such as the pandemic, to a national health system as opposed to a separate system depending on geography?
I mean, I can't speak for the entire healthcare. I think that's more of a political discussion rather than just COVID.
Okay, but you were looking at anxiety, depression, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, yeah.
Did you see any difference? Even though, right, so you're looking at different stages in the evolution of the pandemic, but did you see any differences in the expression or the finding of anxiety or PTSD or depression? I mean, when you've got this much data, I would assume that even though it's different stages in the evolution of the disease, you've still got the same psychological variables. So what do you think about that?
Well, I did notice psychological distress and mental health in general was just worse during the outbreak stages compared to the post-pandemic, where COVID kind of tapered off a little bit into seasonal activity. But I think that's to be expected when during an outbreak.
Okay, so let me pick up on to be expected. Was there anything in the data, in your findings, in your study of the research, that surprised you, that you didn't expect to see?
That surprised me. I guess it was probably the social and organizational support. I didn't realize how much of an impact that had on the well-being of the workers there. At first, I thought organizational support would be more helpful. since the hospitals have money and the organization, but it turns out it was actually the social support.
That's an interesting finding. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm handing it over to Meg to follow up.
Great, thanks. All right, so Christopher, I thought that was really interesting. A nice overview, and certainly involving countries that I, as much as we are inundated with information in the US, the last couple of years, I haven't certainly, heard a lot of information about some other countries. Can you talk a little bit about maybe any aspects of this that you think will be helpful for whatever career you plan on moving into, or takeaways from this process that you think were good learning experiences that you want to apply maybe, with your career moving forward?
I think this project definitely helped me polish up my research techniques and just putting together information from different studies and different countries and just kind of putting all that together. I think that was helpful. Since the jobs I've been looking at have been all kind of within the realm of research. So I'm kind of thankful that I kind of did a project in this format.
Okay, great. And so what kinds of, remind me what your concentration areas are?
Can you repeat that?
Well, remind me what areas you're focusing on studying in SOIS that you have been studying.
Mathematics and imaging science.
Okay, all right. So the data piece and how you are thinking about those components and how they intersect with each other is certainly part of what you're interested in pursuing. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'll ask, does anyone else have any questions for Chris?
Yeah, I do quickly. I thought this was really interesting, and I similarly, know a lot less about other data in other countries, obviously. But I was wondering where this data was coming from. I don't think I saw any citations. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm curious what kind of, what your research really looked like and where this information is coming from.
Came from, I put all the citations on my research paper.
Great, yeah.
So all of this it's just directly from my research paper.
Yeah.
I looked at the RIT, some I got from the RIT library online, and then some of it I just kind of Googled and found myself. But yeah, that's pretty much where it came from.
Great. I imagine lots of this is very publicly accessible by now, so that's helpful for you. Thank you.
Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions from anybody else, then we'll go ahead and move on to Leo then.
I guess I'm going to start then, or I guess I'm going to start, or
Perfect. You can go ahead and start sharing your screen.
do you all see that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so my name is Leo Golia, and the title of my capstone is Using Storytelling Aspects in a Marketing Context. So just a quick background of just myself. I'm from Fairport, New York, which is about 20 minutes away from here. My concentrations are obviously marketing and storytelling, and some of my favorite hobbies includes drawing, and since it's getting nice out, I like to go to like garage sales and flea markets. So why marketing and storytelling? My original concentrations here weren't these. I think it was like photography or theater. So the reason I changed is because in high school I was still pretty into like advertising and stuff like that, because I was in like the theater program. So I constantly, was trying like get people to go to our shows, and I was really into the graphic design part of it, like design posters, logos, stuff like that. Because of that, I decided to assume the role of marketing director for both EGS and RIT Improv here at RIT. And it was mostly because I just love those clubs and I want to promote it and help all I can. Then when I started taking classes, I really enjoyed the group, like being part of the group and everyone working together. And And like just the overall problem solving part of it, it's like campaign, like brand A wants to do a campaign, and it's just like how to do that, what different steps to take. Storytelling, like I mentioned before, I come from a strong like theater and improv background, but also in my free time, I love to watch just TV shows and some of the sorts. And like I do sometimes find myself in the rabbit hole of watching like YouTube video essays. And that just got me really thinking strong about structure and just like what works in stories and what doesn't. Some of my favorite like essays I've wrote at RIT like concerns like storytelling, just because I really love talking about it and like analyzing things I like and like why does it do that. So when I started taking these classes side by side, I started noticing connections, and this is what became my project. So this is more or less just going to be a big research paper, just because I like I just like getting my own data, like looking at data and then figuring out how can I go from there. So my research paper and my project is meant in 3 parts, but like in actuality, it's kind of like 7, because the readings and findings, I put those in 3 different groups based on like what I saw. And then the interview, it's that own thing that gives a perspective. And then my conclusion and what does it mean is a little bit 2 different things, because I wanted to talk about why this was important and how to apply this. So one of my first readings I found was called The Rise of Storytelling, Its New Marketing, and it concerned content marketing. And in its simplest terms, content marketing is like the use of like just different types of materials or media it's not meant to directly promote the brand, but I like to view it as like something that kind of provides context, or kind of like your introduction to the brand and the products. Like examples I found in the paper is like magazines, small web series, it's kind of stuff like that. And I feel like if we think of this in a more storytelling area, I feel this is like your intro. This is like kind of like your setting, or like your opportunity to like, show someone like what you're about and like why they should stay. But I feel this was just a good place to start and like just show like the intro. Much of my paper that I just really enjoyed writing about and looking into is thinking of like storytelling structure and how you could do that and use different aspects for marketing campaigns. As you see on the left is a Freytag structure, which is one of the most common forms of like storytelling structure. But I have seen like other ones where it's like, it could branch off, it could be in circles, it could be in the circle. But there was this paper I read, its short title is The Never Ending Storyteller, and it talked about 3 different aspects that's in every story that I could see really working well, being plot, character, and style. And I feel if you think of this in more marketing, or like if you're showing off a brand or thinking of like getting a product, I think these are really good terms. You got something like plot in this context is kind of like your hook, or it's in a brand. I feel this would be your main message, or like your end goal, like what are you trying to show, how you're going to do that. I think my big thing on plot is for it to always move forward. I'll talk about later on like, using social media and then like the short bursts of getting something out there. And I feel like if you need to go from point A to go point B, you have to go like pretty like quick, always be moving. You can't really stall, or it's not really stall, but like, try to like escalate and try to get people to like be hooked in and like follow it. And the best way to do that is with character. Character, I feel, could be a pretty like broad term, because it could be like a person, like it could be like an employee, the founder of the company. It could be the products itself. It could be a mascot. Character is a good place for the audience to like follow, because you have this message, but like the character is like the eyes the audience is following through. And when you think about this, it makes sense, because you need something to grasp onto. And the character I feel could have different types of goals. Want to be relatable to the audience member, have some sort of relatability, and also kind of the state of groundedness. It's like, okay, this is like what kind of message you're trying to take. This is like the grounded, this is what the character is showing. And The third aspect that I think is probably important, especially when viewing this, is style. And I like to view this as like how you want your brand to be shown, like how serious you want to take it, or also most importantly, what is your target audience going to be? Take mascots, for example. Like think of your like cereal mascots, like your Tony Tiger, Trix Rabbit, Toucan Sam. Those are very cartoony designs. Those are very cartoony. They usually are more in absurd situations, and it matches like the product is meant for like a younger audience. Compare that to like Mr. Clean, who is, while again a mascot, but like he's drawn with human proportions. He's meant to be an adult, and that makes sense for the product being cleaning supplies, which is, you know, much more, it's going to appear to like adults and a much older audience compared to a younger audience. So I feel this is a good way because they do have similar messages or similar end goals, but like it's all about how you could show that style. And a most common style you may see is like those emotional connections and like emotionality. However, I feel you need to have a good balance to this, or have a clear understanding of like, okay, this is what we're doing and this is how we do it. Because if that doesn't go well, it may seem, it's just the main message may seem a little underhanded or not well thought through. And I really wanted to talk about social media storytelling. As a marketing manager, I'm mostly on social media, and some of my favorites, or I'm not much myself. I'm personally not do much social media besides like YouTube and Instagram. But I feel this really is interesting, as like social media is definitely a common part of people's lives now, and it allows people to like show themselves and kind of show their own story. But this means there's just so much content now. How are you going to stick out? How are you going to get your audience to choose to stick with you? And the most common form, especially in Instagram, which I'm much more familiar with, is like visuals and video. And a personal like example I have of this as the marketing director for RIT Improv, I've noticed that like when we post like announcements of our shows, we'll have like a big quick graphic. I notice those get likes compared to like photos, post-show photos, or even like posters with photos on. And I always wonder why that is. And then I start thinking about it and thinking like, oh, our target audience is college students, and that could be their friends, and like, you know, they have some type of connection there. And even then, like, you could always so much with a graphic, but with like an actual photo of like the people doing in the show, there's much more like context, or much more things that make it unique, and people like seeing people having fun. There's a small story behind that. And I feel that's like a really important thing of like having a more genuine feel to your marketing, like having some type of real life backbone to that when telling the story. This brings me to my interview with Sarah Collins at Partners of Napier. I had this interview it was a mid to late February with her. She worked at Partners in Napier, which is a local ad agency, as a copywriter. And if you're unfamiliar with what a copywriter is, they are pretty much people who write primary marketing material. So this could be like blogs, short social media tags, scripts for like advertisements. So something along the lines of that. And while I was talking to her, I started to make a realization that we're both similarities, that we were both pretty creative. While I feel I'm more visually or like artistic creative, and she's more in writing, I could still get that. And something that she said that stuck with me is like, I asked her like what her normal like day looks like, and she's constantly says like, oh, I just like check in with like the graphic designer or the photographer. And I feel when you're doing something storytelling related with different types of media, it's important to like, you know, have it to be together and do that alongside each other. Because if someone's writing something and someone's like drawing or making photos based on it, it's best for everyone to be together, as you don't want the message or the story to fall through. this brings me to the various involvement of client, which I found really interesting, as she mentioned that the client sometimes is there a little bit, sometimes they're there for like the entire time. And I found that really interesting as I found from like writing and creative writing, it's really easy to talk about yourself than someone else. So this kind of involvement is really important when you're trying to figure out the message and story for the brand. So why is this important? Like I mentioned before with social media, storytelling is very universal. And I think people don't really think about it that way, because when you think of like the biggest like pieces of our culture, even internet culture, it's like your TV shows, big movies, it's very much a part of our culture and how we interact with each other. Think about all the different conversations you have where you have your own like small stories and mentioning yourself. I feel it brings like a kind of uniqueness to ourselves.
Leo,
And
you
this-
have 1 minute.
Okay, this leads me to what I think is marketing yourself with these tactics. If we did what I just said earlier, your resume could function as your content marketing, because while yeah, you have like your past things, which I think is so important to have there, that's more of the what. And I want to focus more on the why and how you got there. I've been in a few classes where I talked about elevator speech and like the main interview, and like using yourself as like, this is my plot, like this is my story, this is why I want to be part of this thing, part of this organization. Think of yourself as a character. What kind of character are you? How do you want to show that? Do you talk more seriously? Do you talk more casual? How do you want to get that across? And having a good story and having a good idea around that, I feel is important, as it brings a connection, because anyone could have the same thing on a resume. It's only of like the line of thinking and how you got there that matters. That's my sources, and I think I'm opening it up for questions.
Thanks, Leo. So that last point makes me ask you, so when you learn about how to write a resume, it's fairly traditional that you know what you put in there. But it seems to me that what you're suggesting is that those traditional categories, you know, bullet points, very black and white, this is what I did, et cetera, and when I did it, that's, I suppose that, you know, the reader can fill in and make that a story, but they need to do some work to do that. So do you have any, I guess what I'm asking is, do you have any thoughts about how one might craft a resume to be more like the elevator speech than a traditional resume?
Well, for the resume for self, you could only do so much because you don't want to have too much. Like I recently did, like, actually I said it was the same day as I had my interview with Sarah, that I had a resume look over, and they just mentioned, you know, having like a quick blurb, like a quick 2-sentence thing about yourself. But also another good way to do that is like the cover letter is an excellent way of having that context. But if you're talking more about the resume itself, I feel like if you have like small little bullet points, you could say like something simple as like, if I put this capstone project, I put like passion project, or like idea of my thoughts, like something like a quick like 4 to 5 sentence like tag that just like explains why this was important.
Okay, so I assume this, you know, I'm not familiar with the theory of marketing in any great detail. So the notion of using stories seems to me to be like, you know, I can't imagine that's a novel idea. I mean, that has to be a frequent way of looking at marketing, right? Or am I wrong about that? Is this a novel way of looking at marketing?
Yeah, like I feel like how I like got across from this like topic to think of it this way is more or less just like how I think about stories. And like, yeah, I feel like it could be it is a pretty common tool, but I was kind of thinking of this topic more as for like small businesses and clubs, because like those are very much like, personal and like have a local targeted audience. So I feel like when you get to like those kinds of businesses, I feel this is much more important because it provides more meaning of like why they're doing this.
There must be there's got to be, I mean, an ad is a brief, it doesn't take very many seconds to do an ad, and to make that into a story. I suppose if you have a sequence of ads that go to the same brand and they can tell different parts of the story, but in a 30-second ad, it's kind of hard to make that into a story. So that would be a skill that you would need to develop, but I can see that it would be very worthwhile if you could do that. I mean, stories are what, we live with stories. I mean, they really are motivators. So the idea is, the concept seems to me to be a really productive concept, but I could see that it might be difficult to put it into practice.
Yeah, like I was thinking this more as like also like applying different aspects, like how like you could use different character and like the idea of like using plot.
Yeah,
I feel like not necessarily doing a whole story, but thinking of like using those tactics is still quite important.
yeah, I see what you mean. Meg?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So just going off of actually what Stephen was saying, I would say that's probably why, if you are a really successful commercial producer, that's essentially what you're doing, right? You're telling a really quick story. So you have to be really talented at it. So my question, Leo, is you've got a lot of really good practical advice and direction. And I really like that you sought out another professional that's really hovering around the same disciplinary interests that you have. Did Sarah provide any useful career advice for you in terms of how you move forward with your particular concentration areas?
We talked a little bit about that. Something I know we mentioned and like she kind of like encouraged me is like, going more of like my personal like storytelling stuff, because I said like, I draw, I've been busy lately, so I still want to do like my own content stuff. And she's like, saying like, continue with that. And like, those are like good ways of like, gain more exercise and experience for that.
Okay, good. We want to open it up. We've only got 15 minutes left, so we'll go ahead and open it up to anybody else that has a question for Leo.
I'll keep it brief, but I just want to compliment you and say that I do lots of stuff related to narrative work and narrative theory. So this was particularly interesting to me. But because I work in that stuff, I rarely kind of apply it to other contexts. And I think you handled the idea of not just using the narrative arc, but plot and character and emotion really nicely. I think that was very well done.
Thanks,
So
Tan.
let's move on to Marie. If you're ready to share your screen, Marie, it's all yours.
All right. Okay, everyone can see me in my PowerPoint.
Yep.
So today I'm going to focus on, social media. Can it influence criminal justice or not? Now, my background is in graphic design, a lot of printing, photography, and those kinds of things. So also photography and also criminal justice. So a lot of times I think about, what the impact that we have on the criminal justice system in social media, because we know recently, and even 2020 with George Floyd, that situation, and BLM, and all of those things. So this is how my research project was set up timeline-wise. I wanted to do an informal survey online, I don't want their identities or their opinions, but what I really wanted was the questions to be answered about, tendencies of feeling comfortable, and those kind of things to be documented. So there were 7 questions total. And I did summarize some questions here in these bullets. But I noticed after I collected the data from my informal survey, 80% of them who participated in the informal survey said that social media does influence criminal justice in some ways. That was interesting. I didn't realize how many people, actually did agree with that topic. So it was an interesting finding. One question I asked as well, I asked them about a specific word that they think could, have like a tagline that you see on a flyer or on a poster or a video or any kind of that media. So, I'd ask them, are there words that, influence that? So with that, 66% said that they somewhat agreed with the question. Personally, I thought maybe, under 50 would answer that they agreed with that question. And so those results were a little shocking to me. Again, the answers vary throughout the survey. One thing I also asked about was a newspaper company or a news source specifically, and their impact on cases, for example, shooting cases, or even the George Floyd case specifically. Half of the participants strongly agreed that there was an enormous impact, especially the spreading of misinformation. The other half, maybe not, somewhat, not really 100% agree, but also don't fully disagree. I did predict those results. One question that I did ask of their thoughts, their opinion related to criminal justice in general. There's so many variables and situations, that I could not name all of them. It would take so much time to research. So I decided to keep the question broad. And so I asked, does social media influence criminal justice rates going up? 47% of people replied somewhat. The question about whether or not it can decrease criminal justice cases, 41% of those people disagreed, while 41% of people were neutral. They neither agreed nor disagreed. It was interesting to see the amount of people in agreement versus the amount of people who disagreed with whether or not this has an impact. I asked them about flyers that target criminal justice issues, if they are helpful. For example, it was an odd result, but they were 3 even, 33% for each question. It was an even answer. So, 33 said probably not, another said might, and some said might not, and probably yes. I thought that was strange. Again, 80% of the people who participated in the informal survey, they either agreed or did not in some way or another. The last question that I asked on the survey, I asked if there were any words specifically that could impact criminal justice or things going on. And one word that I got a lot of responses were racial. That made sense to me because the word racial in and of itself is, a huge term that's being used so often now in so many different contexts. but also there weren't many answers to understanding why it does have such an impact. There's the white systemic oppression and all of these things. So it's been very interesting to see the results overall. So that is my presentation. Stephen, this is Katie. I think you're muted.
Thank you, Marie. My first question is this, have you done survey research before? Is this the first time that you've done a survey, or are you more familiar with it? And can you tell me?
Now I'm muted. Here we are. So honestly, I did intern with the criminal justice department before. And I'm more focused there on documentation, and other things. But I also have, heard a lot of, misconceptions related to social media, ads, misinformation, and criminal justice and how they connect. So that's kind of how I made that connection.
So my question, I didn't ask my question very clearly. My question is about the process of writing a survey and collecting data. So I don't know if you've got experience with writing surveys before, and that's the first part of my question. The second part of my question is, having done this survey, as you look back at how it went, do you have any thoughts about what you wish you'd done with regard to the construction and distribution of your survey?
Yeah, so your first question, yes, well, I did research some survey outlines and about how to collect that data, but it was more made by the public department rather than the college version of that. So I have made my own survey before, but I took theories of class related to criminal justice, which I could go deeper into, but the part is that I wish that I could show some examples, on the survey that people could understand more of what I was getting at, or, add some more questions or something like that, but.
Well, perhaps you can do that for the symposium. But again, my question is, now you're at the end, you've done the survey, looking back, do you have any thoughts about how you might have made a better survey or got better results than the survey that you actually did do?
I would just say, so the way that the survey was created maybe was, could include more specific terms, that people often use in social media flyers, like, like hot button terms, trigger words, and things like that. But yeah, I would love to include that for the symposium.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much, Marie. Meg?
Thanks, Stephen. So Marie, nice job. My question actually is a little bit related to Stephen's question, and that is that just this idea of social media is huge, right? So I'm wondering if it would be helpful for you to narrow down the field of social media into something a little bit more specific. And had you thought about that? So I guess, one example I would give you is sometimes I get a little bit of my news on social media. So news on social media impacting criminal justice is different than I think the social media you're referring to. But maybe it isn't. So can you clarify how you've defined social media? And so when you talk about it having an impact on criminal justice, what we're actually talking about?
Yeah, so right now, I am more focused on the general broad social media. But I did notice during that that the news part, from Instagram, on Facebook, and all of those, you name it, all of those platforms. But then also there are these new notifications for fake news and false news. And, I've looked and they do have them, and they will, put that there is false information related to perspective of this. And so that is something that has changed recently.
And there's certainly slanted news, right? So it may come from an official news source that isn't considered fake news, but it may lean one way or the other. So, okay, interesting. I really enjoyed that, and I look forward to hearing more about your results and seeing your full survey at the symposium and when you turn in your papers. Hannah, do you have any questions?
Yes, I'll keep it snappy though. I know we're right at 6. So this was great. I'm glad to see the results of your survey. I know you've spent lots of time thinking about it. I have similar feedback as Meg though. I'm wondering, I'm curious about your specific understanding of the different parts of criminal justice, because criminal justice is also broad, right? You have the field of criminal justice as an academic discipline, you have law enforcement, you have legislation, you have all kinds of different parts of the field, right? So I would encourage you to spend some time before the symposium thinking about how you're approaching your own understanding of that, and what you really specifically mean when you're asking people about their understandings of social media and criminal justice. I think that'll make your presentation stronger. This was great, but I think that's I think that'd be a great improvement for, keeping in mind that we have a very broad audience at this symposium. I think that would make it stronger. But it was great, thank you. And Jenny loved it too.
Thanks, Hannah. I think that's a really good point. Okay,
Yeah, thank you all for the feedback. I think that would be a great addition.
great. Well, we're right at 6 o'clock, which is honestly a miracle. But you all did a great job. And, we just want to comment that we know how much you're balancing this right now, all your other courses and getting to the finish line. And we're really proud of the work that you're putting in. And we know that you're not done with the capstone work. You've got several other things that still need to be completed, but we look forward to seeing you on the 25th. And, good luck with everything, and great job.
Yeah, I'll second the motion. We'll see more of your projects at the symposium. And if you're not done yet, I hope the next 2 weeks before the symposium are productive. And pretty soon you will be done, and the semester will be over. And I don't know, whether you're all graduating or not, but you're certainly getting closer to it. So congratulations on your presentations, and see you on the 25th.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Thanks, Hannah, for being here. Take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks
to the interpreter.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too, Katie. All right, hold up.